There's a new book that's come out. It's called Animal Madness: How Anxious Dogs, Compulsive Parrots, and Elephants in Recovery Can Help Us to Understand Ourselves. Now, the interesting thing about this book is that rather than looking at drugs being tested on animals, it takes drugs that have first been, of course, tested on animals, then used routinely on humans, and now have gone full circle back into the zoo. And so it provides us some interesting insights. And of course, in reviews, people have talked about anthropomorphism. In other words, projecting human characteristics onto animals. I say to speak of mental illness in animals requires a degree of anthropomorphizing, or this is a humane, insightful, beautifully written book. Animal Madness gives anthropomorphism a good name. What about anthropomorphism in reverse? Yes, are we treating humans like animals? Let's take a look at a couple of the excerpts from the book, but before we do, there's also another school of thought in how we control animals, and that, of course, is the B.F. Skinner Behavioral Modification School. We use positive operant conditioning to control the animals. Skinner's techniques are actually a humane way to communicate with and to control animals. The problem arises with the reverse anthropomorphism, when Skinner starts to treat humans as animals, devoid of freedom and dignity. Of course, much of our government's interaction with everyone from children in schools to airplane travelers with TSA is based on positive operant conditioning. In other words, let me touch you wherever I want, and I'll reward you with allowing you to get on a plane. Now, of course, the other popular way to control people is with pharmaceuticals.
If Mr. McMurphy doesn't want to take his medication orally, I'm sure we can arrange that he can have it some other way.
Brightman's book gives us some perspectives on that. Now, Thorazine, of course, was first tested on rats, and what they found was that even though rats could easily climb up a rope to get to some food, once they put them on Thorazine, they couldn't be bothered. Even when they knew a shock was coming on, they would just sit there. What happened when they gave Thorazine to a gorilla in the zoo? This is a gorilla that was going to have to be relocated to a very small cage for a period of 6 months while his usual habitat was repaired. So what they did to help him cope was what any good psychiatrist would do. They put some Thorazine in his Coke. What did that do for him? Well, the zookeeper said he shuffled back and forth across his cage with dulled eyes. It was a little like watching the men in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Now, a review of her book that's on Wired.com today covers a couple of interesting anecdotes entitled, Even the Gorillas and Bears in Our Zoo Are Hooked on Prozac. They look at what happens when we take these drugs that we've now approved for massive use on humans and then turn around and use them on animals in the zoo. Gus, the famous polar bear from the Central Park Zoo, was put on Prozac because he was swimming for 12 hours a day. Now, as an aside, that's what polar bears do. They range over hundreds of miles, and of course, that's why you see all these pictures of polar bears sitting on ice floes looking like they're forlorn, like their habitat is melting. No, they range over several hundred miles a day. So this polar bear was swimming 12 hours a day, and they said that that is 0.00009% of his usual habitat. But of course, instead of giving him a larger habitat, which they couldn't do, they put him on Prozac to try to control his behavior. Now, some of the zookeepers who were using psychopharmaceuticals on these animals were curious if other zoos were doing the same thing. Half of the 31 institutions throughout the U.S. and Canada that responded to their survey had used psychopharmaceuticals on their gorillas. But here's the interesting thing about it. They said no one is going to admit it. Why are they ashamed of the fact that they're using psychopharmaceuticals on animals in the zoo, and they're not ashamed of using it on humans? And of course, that's the real question. The new reboot of the Planet of the Apes series has big pharma experiments going out of control with devastating consequences for humans. But the reality is that big pharma has been out of control for a long time, and with devastating consequences. These drugs are now being prescribed even for animals in the zoo, are being used so prolifically on humans that they're showing up in our water supply as well. And of course, one of those consequences for society is the connection between psychopharmaceuticals and mass shootings. If the primates in the zoo are on Prozac, Zoloft, etc., just make sure you don't give them the guns. We know what those drugs motivate people to do.
You've experienced and heard about the benefits of super male vitality. Now, the new formula has arrived. Introducing the new Super Female Vitality. I have specifically designed this formula to help the body naturally regulate itself without the use of artificial hormones. Key ingredients chosen from the highest quality sources. Secure your Super Female Vitality today from our limited stock at InfoWarsLife.com.